They smiled, raised their glasses, and thanked me for the $3,750 dinner. Then had me thrown out, because I wore jeans. Before we dive in, I ask just one thing. Stay with me to the end. And if this story speaks to you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it. It helps more than you know. I wanted to do something nice, something that would bring us closer. My in-laws had always kept a little distance from me. They were polite but never warm. I wasn't sure why, but I always felt like an outsider around them. Still, I kept trying. So when their anniversary was coming up, I saw it as a chance to show them I cared. I told my husband I wanted to take care of the entire dinner. He looked surprised but happy, and he said it was generous of me. I thought maybe this would finally help them see me in a better light. I went all in. I picked one of the best restaurants in town, the kind with white tablecloths and soft lighting. It wasn't cheap, but I wanted everything to be perfect. I made calls, arranged a private dining space, selected the full menu with appetizers, main course, dessert, wine, everything. I even made sure they had options for everyone, including the picky eaters in the family. The bill came to $3,750, and I paid it in full up front. No one asked me to. I did it from my heart. When I told my in-laws about the dinner, they were polite. Not excited, not thankful, just polite. They said thank you, of course, but it felt distant, like they weren't sure how to react. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe they just weren't used to such gestures. Maybe they needed time. My husband kept saying they appreciated it, even if they didn't show it much. I believed him. I started to picture the evening in my mind. Everyone dressed nicely, soft music in the background, clinking glasses, laughter. I imagined them raising their glasses to me, thanking me for the effort, maybe even saying I was part of the family. That thought made me smile. I told myself it would be worth every dollar. The day before the dinner, I double-checked everything with the restaurant. They had my booking, the menu, the guest list. Nothing was left to chance. I even arranged for a cake with their names written in gold icing. I didn't want them to feel like guests. I wanted them to feel celebrated. This was their day, and I wanted to honor it the best way I could. I didn't tell anyone how much it cost. I didn't want it to be about money. I wanted it to be about love, about connection. I hoped they'd see my heart in all the little details. Maybe, just maybe, this dinner would open a door that had always been closed between us. I wanted to believe that something good would come from it. I really did. The evening of the dinner finally arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and hope as I got ready. I chose an outfit that felt like me, stylish but not loud. Dark designer jeans that fit perfectly, a soft pearl-colored blouse, and a pair of modest heels. It wasn't flashy, but it was neat, comfortable, and well put together. I didn't think twice about it. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to feel like myself. I arrived at the restaurant on my own. My husband had gone earlier to help settle his parents in. I thought that was fine. It would give them some space to chat without me hovering. I walked through the restaurant doors with a smile, ready to see everyone and feel the joy of the evening I had worked so hard to plan. But the moment I stepped into the room, I felt it. A strange shift in energy, like the air had gone still for a second too long. His sister was the first to notice me. She looked me up and down, not subtly. It wasn't admiration or even curiosity. It felt like judgment. Her expression didn't change much, but it was enough for me to feel it in my gut. Then came his mother's turn. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that made you feel smaller, not welcomed. My husband walked over to greet me, but even his face looked uncertain. He smiled, yes, but there was something behind it. A flicker of hesitation. It was like he was measuring my outfit, my presence, against some invisible checklist I didn't know existed. He leaned in and gave me a kiss on the cheek, quick and careful, almost like he wasn't sure it was the right thing to do. That tiny moment stayed with me, though I tried to brush it off. I took my seat, feeling a little more aware of myself than I had expected. I smoothed down my blouse, adjusted my necklace, glanced around. Everyone else was dressed nicely, sure, but no one was in ball gown. There were dresses, yes, and a few men wore jackets, but nothing over the top. I didn't stand out that much. At least, I didn't think I did. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The small talk was there, but it was light and surface level. No one asked me how I was. No one mentioned the dinner or thanked me again. There were compliments about the restaurant, about the food, but none directed my way. I smiled, nodded, and kept my hands folded in my lap. I caught his sister whispering to her cousin, followed by a quiet laugh. I wasn't close enough to hear the words, but I knew the tone. That low kind of laugh that you can feel in your bones when it's about you. His mother glanced over again, then looked away. I sipped my water, trying to ignore the way my cheeks were starting to burn. It wasn't open hostility. It wasn't loud or cruel. That would have been easier to fight. No, this was quieter, more careful. A room full of smiles that didn't feel kind, conversations that seemed to move around me instead of through. It was like being present but invisible. The kind of discomfort you can't quite explain, but can feel all the same. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe it was just nerves. Maybe they were just overwhelmed by the evening. I told myself to breathe, to enjoy the food, to let the night unfold. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, something's not right. The waiters moved around the room with practiced ease, placing small plates in front of us. Little bites arranged neatly, elegant and quiet. I picked at mine, barely tasting it. The laughter around the table grew louder in some places and softer in others. It wasn't loud enough to be joyful, but not quiet enough to be comfortable. I watched the faces, the mouths moving, the clinks of glasses. Everyone seemed to know exactly when to speak, who to speak to, and who to avoid. I wasn't part of that rhythm. I joined a few conversations, smiled where I needed to, and nodded politely. But the replies to me were brief, as though my words didn't need to be expanded on. One of his cousins turned her chair slightly away from mine, just enough to make me feel like an extra at my own table. My husband didn't notice. Or maybe he did and pretended not to. He was busy talking to his father, laughing at some old story, relaxed in a way he never quite was around me when they were present. The waitstaff refilled our drinks. The wine glasses clinked again. I noticed his mother reach across the table to compliment his sister's earrings, something small, ordinary. But the way she said it, warm and proud, made me realize I had never once heard that tone used with. It wasn't jealousy. It was something lonelier than that, the absence of belonging. As I looked around, I noticed how people seemed to find each other easily with glances, like they were all in on a shared understanding. I wasn't part of that. Every time I laughed or spoke, the reaction was delayed or missing altogether. I started shrinking inside myself, growing quieter with each bite, every passing minute making me feel like less of a guest and more of a mistake. I reached for my glass, and as I took a sip, I heard a low giggle from across the table. I glanced up. His sister and a cousin were whispering again, eyes darting my way. I couldn't hear the words, but the timing told me everything. I gave a soft smile, unsure what else to do. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want my discomfort to turn into their entertainment. Even the waiter seemed to avoid eye contact with me. When he set my plate down, he didn't say a word. Not rude, just indifferent. That was worse. I wasn't even worth a polite nod. I adjusted in my seat. It felt colder than it should have been, like I'd been sitting in a place that didn't welcome me. My legs were crossed, my napkin folded neatly on my lap, and yet I felt completely out of place. Everyone looked comfortable. I was the only one fidgeting, second-guessing, quietly questioning my presence. I kept hoping my husband would lean over, squeeze my hand, or offer some small kindness. He didn't. The lights above cast a soft golden hue over the table, but somehow I still felt like I was sitting in a shadow. No one said anything cruel, not directly, but silence has its own sharp edge, and that night I felt every slice of it. I sat still, trying to hold the smile on my face even though my cheeks were starting to hurt. The conversations carried on around me, light and meaningless, like I wasn't even there. A few people had shifted their chairs slightly, forming smaller circles that didn't include me. I took another sip of water. The wine had gone warm, and I wasn't in the mood for it anyway. I caught my husband looking at me once across the table. Our eyes met for a split second. He looked away too quickly. No smile, no comfort. I told myself not to overthink it, but something in my chest was tightening, something heavy that I couldn't name yet. The table was being cleared for dessert, and the waiters were moving around briskly. A cousin across from me started showing pictures on her phone. They all leaned in to look. I stayed still, pretending not to notice that I wasn't included. They didn't even angle the screen my way. I felt like furniture. I checked my phone under the table. No messages. Nothing to distract me. I scrolled through old photos instead. Pictures from when I'd first met his family. I saw images of forced smiles, stiff hugs, and me trying hard in every frame. Always trying. Always hoping. Auntie Ada's laughter snapped me out of it. Her voice was loud and clear. It's always better when you stick with tradition, she said. I wasn't sure what she meant, but it earned nods and chuckles from the others. Then someone added, some people forget where they are. A beat passed before they all laughed again. I set my phone down. The heaviness in my chest deepened. My fingers felt cold. I folded them in my lap and stared at the empty plate in front of me. I kept hearing things that weren't said out loud. Judgment in the silences, rejection in the small shifts of conversation. My heart thudded slowly in my ears. Someone snapped their fingers at the waiter, asking for more champagne. Someone else asked if the dessert would include the raspberry tarts again, like last year. No one asked me what I thought. No one thanked me for choosing the menu or making the special arrangements the restaurant didn't usually offer. The couple at the end of the table was whispering, sneaking glances in my direction. I tried to look away, but my eyes locked with theirs for just a second before they quickly turned back to their private world. I was outside again. I had been all night. The clink of a fork falling to the ground startled me. It broke the low hum of laughter and clinking glasses. I bent to pick it up, but the waiter was already there. He gave me a look, soft, unreadable, and replaced it with a clean one. I whispered, "Thank you." He didn't respond. By then, my heart was sinking low, lower than before. I had tried so hard to make this evening special, to be seen as one of them. But the more I smiled, the more invisible I became. I sat there, surrounded by people I'd spent thousands of dollars on, feeling like I didn't belong. And still, I kept smiling, because I didn't know what else to do. I walked back slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. My legs were moving, but my mind was spinning. I could feel the weight of every eye on me, though no one said a word. The silence around the table was louder than anything I had ever heard. I stood there for a moment, waiting, maybe for someone to speak up, to ask if I was okay, to say it was all a mistake. But no one did. I looked directly at my husband. He sat there, staring at his plate like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. He didn't get up. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't even look surprised. I waited a few seconds longer, hoping he would finally break the silence. But all I got was more of it. His mother glanced at me for a split second, then quickly turned away. His father adjusted his tie and kept sipping his drink like nothing had happened. And then his sister, the one who had been throwing sharp looks all evening, leaned back in her chair and said, "Maybe next time, dress appropriately." Her voice was low, but clear enough for the whole table to hear. A few people smirked behind their glasses. My heart was thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt heat rush up to my face, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I glanced back at my husband again. He still hadn't moved. Not a word. Not even a raised eyebrow. Just quiet acceptance of everything happening around him. And that's when it hit me. The people at the table, they had always kept their distance. They had never fully accepted me. But I had convinced myself that he was different. That no matter what, I had one person on my side. In that moment, standing there, feeling like a stranger among people I had tried so hard to please, I realized I was completely alone. This wasn't just about a dress code or a pair of jeans. It was about respect, about dignity, about standing by the person you claim to love. And he didn't. He watched me be dismissed, humiliated, and disrespected, and he did nothing. That kind of silence doesn't come from discomfort. It comes from agreement. I took one last look at him, hoping, praying for something. A word, a gesture, a sign that I still mattered. But all I got was silence. Cold, heavy, and final. So I turned and walked away. Not because I was weak, but because I finally saw the truth, and I refused to stay where I was clearly not welcome. I walked out of that restaurant with slow, steady steps. The night air hit me like a splash of cold water, sharp, clear, and oddly comforting. I didn't even notice the noise of the city or the cars passing by. Everything felt quiet in my head, like time had slowed down just long enough for me to catch my breath. My car was parked not far from the entrance. I found the keys in my bag, unlocked the door, and sat down inside. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, both hands resting on the wheel, eyes staring blankly ahead. I wasn't crying. I thought I would, but I wasn't. It was a strange kind of calm, the kind that comes right before a storm you didn't know you were capable of. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message from someone at the dinner. I didn't open it. I knew what it would say, some shallow excuse or worse, silence dressed up as politeness. I picked up the phone, but instead of replying, I started searching through my email. Every booking confirmation, every receipt, every tiny bit of proof that I had been the one to plan and pay for the evening. I started organizing them into a folder. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with it all, but I knew I needed to have it ready. People forget fast. People twist stories even faster. I wasn't going to let anyone rewrite what happened that night. I sat back and took a deep breath. The valet passed by my window once or twice, eyes flicking toward me but quickly looking away. I could tell he felt sorry, but didn't know what to say. And honestly, I didn't need his sympathy. What I needed was clarity, and I was beginning to find it. I thought about all the months I had tried to make them like me. The invitations, the gifts, the effort to show up and fit in. I thought about the times I laughed at jokes that weren't funny, nodded at opinions I didn't agree with, wore clothes they liked even when they didn't feel like me. I did all of it hoping that one day, I would feel like I belonged. But sitting there in that car, I realized that no amount of money, kindness, or compromise would ever be enough for people who didn't want to accept me. And worse, who didn't respect me. Especially not when my own husband didn't even try to stand up for me. I turned the engine on, but I didn't drive off right away. I just listened to the hum of the car, letting it ground me. I wasn't sure what my next step would be, but I knew this. I was done shrinking myself. I was done staying quiet. That night, I didn't just walk out of a restaurant. I stepped away from years of trying to prove my worth to people who had already made up their minds. And something about that decision made the silence feel lighter. He walked in like nothing had happened. No apology. No tension. Just the sound of keys dropped on the kitchen counter and the casual clearing of his throat as he asked if I had eaten. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, going over everything in my head for the 100th time. I had imagined all kinds of things. Maybe he'd walk in angry on my behalf. Maybe he'd be ashamed. Maybe, just maybe, he'd come in ready to say he was wrong, that he should have stood up. But none of that happened. There was no urgency in his voice. No heaviness in his eyes. He was just normal, like it was any other night. I kept waiting for the words that never came. I thought maybe he'd ask how I was feeling, or if I was okay. But instead, he started complaining about how awkward it was after I left. How his sister had to explain to the guests why I disappeared. How his parents were disappointed that the night ended the way it did. I sat still, hands clenched, listening to each sentence like they were nails being driven into a wall between us. When I finally looked up, he was on his phone, scrolling. I asked him directly, "Why didn't you say something when they kicked me out?" He paused, looked at me like I was overreacting, and shrugged. That shrug, it told me everything. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The anger I had been pressing down all night started rising. I asked again, but louder this time, demanding an answer. He put the phone down slowly and muttered, "You're making this bigger than it is." That's when something cracked inside me. The years we had spent together, every small moment where I felt belittled by his family, where he laughed when they mocked my ideas, when he called me sensitive for pointing out how cold they were, suddenly came rushing back. I had buried so many of those moments under the hope that things would get better, that he'd defend me next time, that I just needed to try harder. But now I saw it clearly. It was never about me trying harder. It was about him never choosing me. I stood up and faced him, eyes burning, voice shaking, but steady. "Do you even understand what they did to me tonight?" I asked. He looked away. That's when I realized he didn't want to understand. It was easier for him to let them do what they wanted and hope I would just stay quiet. I felt something shift inside me. A wall that I didn't know I was leaning on had crumbled. And there was no going back. I wasn't going to beg him to see me anymore. If he couldn't see me now, after tonight, he never would. That room suddenly felt too small. And us, like two people who no longer belonged in the same story. I didn't sleep that night. The room was dark and quiet, but my mind wasn't. My thoughts raced between anger, sadness, and disbelief. I kept going over his words, trying to figure out when exactly things had turned into this. When did I become someone who had to fight for basic respect in my own marriage? By the time the sun began to rise, I had already packed a small bag. I didn't slam doors or leave a note. I didn't know anyone drama. I just needed peace. I booked a hotel room a few miles away, not too far, just far enough to breathe. As I checked in, the receptionist gave me a warm smile. It was the first kind face I had seen in over 24 hours, and it almost made me cry. The room was simple. Neutral colors, clean sheets, soft lighting. But to me, it felt like the first safe space I'd had in a long time. I sat on the edge of the bed, finally letting myself exhale. There was no noise, no judging eyes, no one asking me to shrink myself to fit in. Just silence, the kind that heals instead of hurts. A single text from my husband came through. "Let me know when you want to talk." I didn't reply. He hadn't said sorry. He hadn't asked how I felt. He hadn't even acknowledged what had happened. That text wasn't an olive branch. It was avoidance wrapped in politeness. I wasn't ready to play that game. Later, I took a walk outside the hotel. I didn't know where I was going, but I kept walking. I passed cafes, small stores, strangers talking and laughing like the world hadn't just collapsed under my feet. Somehow it helped. Life was still going, and maybe I could too. When I got back to the room, there was a voicemail. It was from his mother. Her voice was cold, rehearsed. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't say she was sorry. She said she hoped I had calmed down, and that next time I would understand how things work in their family. I didn't even listen to the rest. I blocked her number without hesitation. I knew then this wasn't just a bad night. This was a reflection of everything that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. I called a lawyer that afternoon, not to file for anything, but to ask questions. I needed to know my rights. What would happen if this continued? What were my financial options? What was I entitled to, after all I had invested into this marriage, emotionally and otherwise? It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. I wasn't ready to make any big decisions yet, but for the first time in a long while, I was choosing myself. I sat down at the small desk in the hotel room, opened my laptop, and began writing everything out. Every detail, every date, every conversation I could remember. Not because I wanted to keep score, but because I wanted to stop rewriting the past in my head to make others comfortable. I had been quiet for too long. That time was over. Days passed quietly, but not without movement. The refund had come through, and although the money didn't erase the pain, it settled something deep inside me. At least they couldn't take that too. I had every email, every confirmation, and when I sent it all to the restaurant with a firm note, they didn't hesitate to do what was right. Their apology was polite, professional, but cold. Still, it was done. That chapter was closed. I didn't tell my husband about the refund. I didn't tell anyone. I just packed a small bag and moved into a better hotel. One with soft white sheets, working air conditioning, and no one talking down to me. For the first time in a while, no one was watching me or measuring me with their eyes. I could sit in silence and breathe. It wasn't long before the story started spreading. I didn't say a word, but people always talk. A cousin of his messaged me a few days later with just one line. I heard what happened. That was disgusting. I didn't reply. Then an aunt I hadn't heard from in months called, saying she couldn't believe what they did to me. Another cousin sent a screenshot of a group chat where someone had written, "Why would they do that to the person who paid for the whole dinner?" It grew slowly, like smoke through cracks. The polite smiles people once gave his family at events started to thin out. I knew how they operated. They cared about appearances more than anything. And now the appearance wasn't good. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't have to. The truth had done all the work for me. One of his childhood friends ran into me in a grocery store and awkwardly said, "If it means anything, not everyone agrees with how they treated you." I nodded and kept walking. It wasn't personal anymore. I had moved past needing their approval. At the hotel, my phone stayed quiet. His mother never called again. His sister didn't even try. But the silence wasn't peace. It was guilt wrapped in pride. They thought if they said nothing long enough, I'd come crawling back, pretending nothing had happened. They didn't realize something had shifted. My husband sent a short message. "Do you want to talk?" I didn't answer. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what he could do. He didn't say sorry. Just, "Do you want to talk?" Like we had just had a mild argument. Like I hadn't been thrown out of something I created with my own money and intentions. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I booked another night. Then another. I took my time. There was no rush to return to a home where my voice didn't matter. And as the days went by, something unexpected happened. People began reaching out not to comfort me, but to distance themselves from what my in-laws had done. A former coworker of his sent a message saying, "If you ever need anything, I know how hard they made your life." Another friend added, "You deserved better." Everyone sees it now. I never asked anyone to take sides. But life has a way of showing people's true colors when you least expect it. And when the dust settled, the people who once made me feel small were the ones scrambling to defend their image. But I wasn't interested in their image anymore. I had nothing to prove, and nothing left to give them. He called again after a week. This time, his voice was quieter. "So, are you coming home?" That was all he said. No apology. No explanation. Just that. I didn't argue. I didn't list what they had done. I didn't bring up the silence at the table, the manager's whisper, or his mother's cruel words. I only asked one thing. When they kicked me out, "Why didn't you leave with me?" There was a long pause on the line. I heard him breathe in, then stop. No words came. Not even an excuse. He didn't say, "I didn't know what to do." He didn't say, "I was shocked." He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He said nothing. And somehow, that was louder than all the laughter they shared at my expense. Louder than his sister's jab. Louder than his mother's smirk. Louder than the chair I pushed back as I stood to leave. That silence told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't just about a dinner, or an outfit, or a party. It was about the fact that when I was humiliated in front of a full room, the man who stood beside me on our wedding day stood behind them instead. So I told him I wouldn't be coming back. Not now. Not later. He didn't ask again. I checked out of the hotel quietly. No drama. No tears. I packed my things and moved into a small furnished apartment a friend helped me find. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. Mine to walk into. Mine to sleep in. Mine to feel safe in. The first night there, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the sky fade into night. No noise. No judgment. No performance. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just knew. I had walked into that dinner hoping for connection, hoping for acceptance, maybe even kindness. But what I walked out with was clarity. Clarity that I would never shrink myself to fit into someone else's family. That I would never again let silence speak louder than that the person who stands beside you in public should also stand behind you in private. I didn't make a scene. I didn't post online. I didn't beg anyone to take my side. I simply left their world. And I didn't look back. Not once. If you were in my place, would you have stayed and tried to fix things? Or done exactly what I did and walked away? I'm honestly curious what you would have chosen. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if my story moved you in any way, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.